What is light? Light is not just the visible light what we can see. Light can be broken up in different types, and we call the whole spectrum the electromagnetic spectrum. If you look at the top right, you can see that light can be created by making an electron oscillate. This creates an oscillating magnetic field and an oscillating electric field. This is what we call an electromagnetic wave or light. Light gets presented as a wave. Light has a wavelength, frequency and speed. Different frequencies of electromagnetic waves produce different kinds of light. If the light is visible, these frequencies will correspond with different colors, as you can see on the bottom right. Frequencies greater than the visible light will exist of ultraviolet, X-ray and gamma rays. And frequencies less than this will qualify as infrared, microwave or radio waves. Light has the speed of 300 million meters per second. So, now that we know what light is, we can also see how light reacts. And if we look at the mirror reflection, we can see that the light ray comes in and touches the surface, which is the incident ray. It comes in at a certain angle. This angle is called the angle of incidence. And then it reflects, and this is called the angle of reflection, which is then just the reflected ray. So why is this? Why do we even need to know this? Well, you can see that we have a specular reflection, which is just, which you can just see as a very smooth object, very glossy. But we also have a diffuse reflection. And you can see that in the diffuse reflection, the surface is quite bumpy. And this also causes a different kind of light. And this also causes the light to be perceived a bit different. And I can show you right now with some water. If you look at these two images, you can clearly see a difference in the reflection. So on the left we have a reflection which is very much mirror-like. This is a specular reflection, and you can see on the surface that it's not very bumpy, right? On the right though, you can see that the surface where the reflection gets reflected upon is very bumpy, and you can clearly see that the reflection is not as clear as on the left image. This is the difference between specular and diffuse reflections. This might not seem important, but the way that you light a scene or an object can have major differences if it is specular or a diffuse. So you want to keep this in mind. And we will go over this in later parts, of course. And now that we have talked about reflection, I also want to go quickly over refraction. It is not that important in this particular course, but the way that a light enters an object and then changes the direction, that is called refraction. And it is different for each material, let's say. So water would change different than glass, for instance. And here you can see it like happening in real time. You can see that the light enters this, it's probably glass, and then changes direction, and then exits the glass again. The surface of an object determines which color gets reflected from the object. And that color ends up in our eyes and gets detected by the cones, what we talked about before, right? White light is all of the colors combined. So you can see that all the colors gets reflected, and that is perceived by us as white light. But on a black surface, you can see that none of the colors are being reflected, and the object kinda soaks everything up. And that is also why you probably should not wear anything black during a sunny day, because it gets warmer. And with colors, you can see only the color that gets reflected. So here we have a red apple. The white light shines on the apple, and only the red light essentially reflects, and that is what we pick up. How do humans see light? The retina of the human eye is covered in light-sensitive cells. Some are shaped like rods, and others are shaped like cones. The rods transmit mostly black and white information, while the cones transmit color information. We have three kinds of cone-shaped cells. Each is sensitive to long, medium or short wavelengths of the light, which also just means red, green and blue. The cells will send the information to the brain, and then our brain can interpret them as colors. So essentially, our eyes can only see red, green and blue, like the main colors, RGB. And all the other colors are a mixture of these wavelengths, and our brain kind of makes those up himself. So how does ray tracing or Blender cycles work? It's quite funny because it's almost opposite of what we see. So what happens with humans is we have a light, then the light bounces upon an object, and then the colors gets reflected, and that is what you see, right? But with Blender cycles or any other ray tracing rendering engine, you go from the camera and that shoots out a ray, and then that ray determines what color the pixel will be, essentially. If you start up Blender, you will start with this scene. This is essentially a camera, a cube and a light. So we already have a light here, which is very nice. This light is a point light. But let's first look what this light actually does. So here you can go to the render properties, and I will change my render engine from Eevee to cycles. Now I like to also activate my viewport shading. So this essentially is our viewport shading, and we can move our light and you can see that it affects the lighting in the scene. What is this light? This is a point light. And we can change all of these options, but let me first edit this cube a little bit so we can actually see these options in real time. I just made it black so we can actually see the light. And what we can see here is the point light and how it works. So essentially the point light emits light in all directions. So if I rotate it, you can see it doesn't matter because it emits it in all directions. You can move it around, of course, you can change the position, but rotation will not really matter. For what is this handy? Why should we use this kind of light? It is very handy for small sources of light. So maybe a light in a room or a candle. You can also illuminate one side of the scene and then change the other side with another kind of color. And you can of course combine it with a lot of other light settings. It is one of the most basic and useful lights that is inside Blender, and you can use it for almost everything. So I also use it for products or even characters or creatures. But let's look at the options that we have for this light. This is a point light. We can change this as well to a sun, spot or area lamp. I will go over these very soon. Let's stick to the point right now. We can change the color, as you can see. We can change the power, which essentially makes the lamp more or less powerful, right? It emits more light. We have the size of the light itself, so you can make the size bigger. You can see that changing the size dramatically changes the way that it reflects here. And I will go over that later on. But it can be handy to make the lamp size bigger or smaller, depending on which kind of shadows or how you want to illuminate your scene. And we have max bounces, which you normally don't really touch. We also have nodes. So if you select nodes, you can see that we have some extra options here. These options will also show in your node editor here down below. So activating those nodes also activates this. You can see that we have an emission node, color, strength, and here is exactly the same. So if I move this around, you can see that this node also changes. This opens up a lot of creativity because you can of course add extra nodes to this. Let's look at the sunlight. So here we have the sunlight, and you can see that if you just activate the sunlight, it's all the way white, right? It's just way too strong. So let's put the strength a bit down. Here we can see that I created this area. It's literally just some displacement on top of here. So we have kind of an environment. And the sun, it doesn't really matter where the position is, because the sun reacts from within the whole 3D space. This essentially just shows where the sun rays will go. Because if I put it underneath here, you can see that it doesn't matter where I put it, the light will stay the same. If I rotate this though, you will see that there is a difference. Let me first rotate it a little bit more like this so we can get some more shadows. And this shadow now goes this way, right? So we can see that the sun is somewhere here and the rays go this direction. If we can rotate this during the z-axis, and you can see that now the whole environment gets lit differently because the sun just rotated. In the sunlight you can change the color, of course, you can change the strength, angle, as well as the max bounces. You can also use some nodes, but this is essentially how the sunlight works. So what do you use a sunlight for? Well, it's very handy for environments, as you can see, which automatically also makes it applicable for exterior architecture renders, so ArcViz, and even some nice volumetric indoor lighting. So yeah, you can also use this kind of light with multiple lights at the same time. Let's now focus on our spotlight. So this is the spotlight. As you can see, this is what it does. It kind of looks like the Mr. Bean intro. And yeah, it does exactly what you can see here. We can change the power, color, size, which essentially you gotta remember the size is the size of the lamp. Okay, so it's this here. It will make it more soft the bigger it is, and we'll go over that in another part again. But we can also change the spot shape. So now you can see that this cone that we have here is this shape, and then we can make it bigger or smaller, and this changes the shape of the cone. And we can also blend it a bit more, so you have an extra little, you can see it here. Let me put this up a bit so you can see it better. You can see that we have a circle inside. What do we use the spotlight for? Well, you can choose multiple things, as always. But one very handy thing that you gotta keep in mind is that this light actually emits light in the direction you choose. So it's the best to use in scenes where you want to light up a specific part or object of the scene, but don't want to light up anything near it. And you can of course also use it to create some cool volumetric lighting. And the last option in this light section is the area light. We can change the color, power, shape even. So normally it's a rectangle and we can change the size of it, but we can also choose a square, rectangle, disc, or ellipse. We can change the size of these and of course also the bounces. So where do we use this light for? Well, the light setting is very broad. You can use it as almost all of them in a lot of ways. And that is why I don't really have anything specific. It's kind of like a mix between the point and the spotlight, but the spotlight has a quite harsh light. It's like a hard shadow, and this light seems to be way more soft. And in the next part I'm going to talk about other ways to light up your scene inside Blender, which do not have to do with adding lights into the scene. See you guys there. Make lights from objects or meshes. This is one of my favorite ways to actually start lighting a scene. I most of the time just do it with planes, so I use a plane instead of a cube. Then go into shading, and I actually want to make sure I get rid of this material. So I created a new material, but I get rid of this principled shader. Get that away, and I add an emission shader. The emission goes into the surface, and here we have a light. So I'm going to cycles for right now, go into the shader editor, and you can see that here we have our light. If we want to see if it works, we're just going to create another cube which is not lit. And I'm also going to create a plane so we can see some shadows. And I'm going to delete the light that is already in Blender. So here you can see that we have our light. Very, very nice. The nice thing about this is, well, we can of course change it to whatever we want. But also we can see them in our scene, okay? So it's not that they are almost invisible. Because sometimes I feel like if you use a light, like an area light, it's kind of hard to see where they are in the scene. It's not, of course, not impossible, but yeah, I prefer these to an area lamp. Another thing that I want to show you guys is that if your light is inside your camera view, you can of course see it, also in the renders. You do not want that, and you can get rid of it very easily. Sometimes you can just put it out, but if the lighting is good, you do not want to move it again, right? So what you do is you select the light, go into your object data properties, and go into visibility here. Now you can turn the ray visibility off for camera. The light will still work, but we cannot see it anymore in our camera view. Very, very cool. This light of course looks good, but in a lot of photography you can see that they use a softbox. And a softbox is not just one plane of emission. It actually has a little bit of a fall off. It is brighter in the middle and then falls off towards the end. We can also recreate it very easily with some extra nodes. So here we have our material nodes, and we can literally just put a gradient texture in here. Color goes into the color, and the normal gradient is a linear. I like to put this at spherical, but the sphere is not really in the middle. You just need to add a texture coordination node here and do object to vector. You can even put UV to vector, but then you gotta change it a little bit up with the mapping node. It depends on which kind of model you are using, because now you still have to change the location a little bit and try to move it in the middle and even scale it up or down. So let's just do the object for right now and forget about the mapping. If we want to edit this spherical gradient, then you just click on Ctrl A and add a color ramp. Put it in between the gradient texture and the emission node, and here we have a color ramp. So you can move these color stops around and you can see that it changes the gradient texture. So essentially you make it sharper or less sharp, and you can even add extra color stops or remove them. So this could be very handy, and normally I like to put this instead of linear to B-spline. Not necessarily because it changes this color, but more because the fall off between two of these color stops is a little bit more graduate and it looks a little bit better. So yeah, you want to move this one to the left, and around here it looks quite alright. You can change this color and you can maybe make it even a little bit brighter. So this is kind of how you create a more softer light for these emission planes. I hope you guys learned from this, and I'll see you guys in the next part. IES light. So what is an IES light? It essentially is just used as kind of a spotlight, but it has a changed distribution profile for the light. So if we look at a normal spotlight, I'm gonna show you, or even a normal light, you will see that we have this result. So I just created a very simple background, and you can see that the light is up against here. And I can change this light to a spotlight, because this is kind of the light that is similar to the ones that we're going to use in the IES. And I have to put the strength way higher, otherwise we can't even see it. So this is what we can see right now. This is just a normal spotlight, but you can see that it does not look really realistic. If we look at lights that might happen inside an interior, so if you look at your lights at your home, or one of these pictures that I'm showing now, you can see that the light doesn't distribute the way that our spotlight does, right? You have some parts go a bit darker, some go a bit brighter, and if we look at these profiles, you can see that we can actually have a lot of different profiles for this, which is very cool. So the only thing you have to do, if you have to create an extra node, so Shift A and you look for IES. And this only works for cycles, by the way. I'm not sure if it already works for EV. And you can just put the VAC into the strength. And you can see that now it changed. I'm going to put this, of course, a bit down. And you can see the difference that it makes, right? So here you can just open them. And I'll just create a new one, star point. And you can see that it changes totally, right? It is not even the same anymore, and it looks way more realistic. So if you're going into interior, or maybe even any outside scene where man-made lights are, and you want to use this kind of light, please do, because it will make a huge difference. So where can you get these? You can get them from multiple sources. I got mine from TurboSquid, but you can also go at I guess Leomoon. Just look up IES light download. So what is an HDRI? An HDRI is a panoramic photo which covers all angles from a single point. You can use these to illuminate a CG scene. And you can see here, HDRI Haven has a lot of free HDRIs, okay? Like loads, as you can see here, for more than 400. You can also make your own, but I will just start off here and then just look what it does to your scenes. As you can see, there are lots of them here, which is great. And you can just download them. So you just click on one and then you can go here. You can download them as big as you want, right? So it goes to 2K, which is normally not needed. I think I most of the time use 4K, and maybe if it's really necessary, then I go to the 8K. But let's go inside Blender. And here I am inside Cycles. I just have a sphere here. This is a glossy sphere, and I have only this lighting here. You can see that, yeah, looks quite okay, but does it look very realistic? I don't think so. And you can go to shading, change this from object to world. You can see that our background always already has some light. And a lot of people don't really know this, because if you delete this lamp, you can see that it's not totally dark. If we actually put this color to black, now we can see that we have literally zero lighting. But instead of changing this color here from dark to light, we can also add an environment node in here. So environment texture, color goes into the color, and what you do here is you just want to add, so open, and add an HDRI to this node. So here you can see that I've downloaded some HDRIs, and they're all from the Texture Haven, so just get them from there. And yeah, let's do this one, Reading Room, for right now. It will take a while, and now you can see that we have some lighting in here. Very, very cool. So literally this whole room will reflect on top of this little ball here. Right? Very cool. So we can also change it to another one. So maybe this one. Kele Interior. Here. Let me delete this plane underneath, and let's just focus on top of this lighting. So as you can see, we can get some really realistic reflections. It's just because we have a HDRI which illuminates the whole scene, and it just creates a very realistic reflections, as you can see. You can of course use this as a standalone lighting to really make a really realistic scene. But you can also lower the strength a little bit and use multiple lighting techniques in combination with the HDRI. The key light. What is a key light? Your key light is your main light. You can also just call it main light. But for right now we just keep calling it key light because it has been mentioned like that in a lot of books. It is a light that sets the tone of the render. The key light gives the object most of its dimension. It is essentially the most important light of your scene. So it doesn't matter if it is the light in front that shows off this detail here, but maybe you want a more of a dramatic scene here where we can only see the profile. That will also be the key light. It is just the way that you want to light your model, and then the most important light in that case. And you also base your exposure around the key light. So now that you know that the key light is just the main light, it's just your main lighting in the scene, now we can go over and talk a little bit about exposure. So exposure is the amount of light which reaches your camera. It is a crucial part of how bright or dark your picture appears. Luckily, we are 3D artists and we don't really have to think about shutter speed, aperture, and all that stuff what photographers have to think about. And we have some tools to actually edit our exposure. So how do we expose an image properly? You are looking for the ideal brightness for your scene. This includes high levels of detail in both the shadows and the highlights. So let's look at the way how to do this inside Blender. So here we are inside Blender, and I want to show you, we have one light in here which is our key light, and I'm gonna hide off all the other stuff so we can just focus upon a render. And we do not really know if the exposure is good. So we go here into our render properties, and somewhere you will find color management. I remember in some earlier parts of Blender it was a little bit lower. Just look for color management and you'll be able to do this. So we have our view transform, which is Filmic. And Filmic is good. You should always render in Filmic. But right now we want to change this to false color. You can see that we have a very weird looking ukulele right now. And this is what the false color does. So there is a little chart with all the colors that we have. And you can see that if I select my light and I put this power up, you will see that the colors start to change. So if we look a little bit at the colors, it goes from black, purple, blue, cyan, green, gray, green, yellow, red, white. So if you overexpose something, which will be in the white, you will lose a lot of the saturation. So you just don't see any difference between the colors anymore in the white areas. If you go lower than black, you of course also don't see anything. So we want to stay at the 0 EV, which is gray. So it's your job to make sure your main light has a nice exposure, and you want to look at some gray values in here. I always like to keep it a little bit higher than gray, just almost to the yellow, but that is a personal preference. So now, if we go back into our Filmic render, you can see that now we have a nice exposure, good exposure. There is one thing though, that sometimes this just looks kind of bland. This has to do with multiple things. Of course, we only have one light in here right now, so it doesn't really pop, as you can say. But we can also change something here, which is called the look. Right now it is set to none, but you can put the contrast a little bit higher. You can see that if I put on high contrast, that the colors and the saturation changes a lot of this ukulele. So you can always try to go in here and change some of this to make your image, I guess, pop a little bit more. Make those colors pop out. So this is the key light, and that is the exposure which we set by our key light. Our other lights will be a lower power than our key light, and this is why you only have to really do it with the key light, because the other ones are going to be lower, and we will not lose too much information with those lights. See you guys in the next part, where we're going to talk about the fill light. The fill light. Why do we use this fill light? What is the fill light? Well, it essentially already says it in the name. It fills up shadows that we have created with our key light, our main light. So the fill light essentially is quite important, because let's look here right now. What can we see in this image here? I can even make it a bit bigger, to be honest. Here. We can see very nice lighting. We already fixed the exposure. We have a nice light on here, which is our main light, but it's quite dark down here, so we cannot see any shape here, and it just, it mixes with the background that we have. So I already created a fill light here, and you can see what this does, right? We fill up these shadows. So how do you create the fill light? It's super easy. You just duplicate the key light, move it over to the side, so I can do it again here, and make sure you put this power down though. It has to be less than the main light, right? So I'm gonna put this at like 20. Can even go lower, actually 10. And this is really just to fill up the shadow that we have created before. And what I also want to show you is that every light that you create has to have a reason. You cannot just create lights because I do it, right? It has to have a reason in your scene as well. So what you should do is turn off your key light and then turn on just the light that you have created. It doesn't matter which light it is, just turn it on and see what it actually does. So you can obviously see that we have created this lighting and it makes sense, right? So together they both make sense, and we can go on with the next light in our scene. Do we need the next light? Do we not? That is also always up to you, but there is another light that I want to talk about. They're kind of two lights, and we'll talk about it in the next part. I see you guys there. The background light or rim light. They're not really the same, but what you essentially want to do is you want to create some separation between the object and the background. So right now I've created a studio which is black, and we already created a fill light around here, and you can see that it filled up this shadow, right? So we already have a separation between our model or our subject and the background here. But if we zoom a little bit in, it sometimes is hard to see the difference between this part and the background. It can also be here, and you can also use the background or rim light to brighten up some edges, just to make it more interesting and create some extra contrast. So I already created one, bam, I put it in the back. And what you want to see with this one, let me actually show you where I put it. I put it here in the back, made it a little bit bigger. You don't really have to make it bigger, that's just one thing that I did. But you want to make it less strong than the key light, okay? Make it less strong than the main light in your scene. And what I want you to see here, the separation between the model and the background is even more visible. You can see it very clearly when I turn it on and off. So here we create this very nice rim. The background light does not have to be just one light. You can put multiple on there, and that is just all up to you. But as I said before, every light has to make sense. Don't just put them there. So if you hide the key light and the fill light, we can see that the rim light that we created actually does make sense, right? We create some light here and we created a separation between the object. Awesome. So now you know the main lights in the scene and you can now start playing around with them. Lighting to me was always just some guesswork. I just did what I saw someone else do and I didn't really understand what lighting was. And this is also why I created this, because I know a lot of people do this. You just have your key light on the left, you have a fill light on the right, and then you have a rim light in the back. And this is cool and all, but if you don't know what you're doing, you're really not showing off your model, your prop, or whatever you're creating, because you're just following someone else without the knowledge of what they are doing. I am not saying it is bad to follow other people's techniques, but if you don't understand the technique, then, you know, it just doesn't work. So, if we're actually gonna look at this light that we have here, and the model, we can see that right now, this lighting position is down at the model, and the model is just looks like a black shape, right? It looks very, very simple. Let me actually put this light in the right position. Here. So now we can see that maybe our model looks very different than we have expected. And you can see that we have put some time, it's not a lot in this case, but some time in our model to actually create these shapes. So even if you guys created amazing looking models, you still have to show that off with the lighting, right? So I see a lot of people that created just amazing models, and you might already think like, dude, my model creation is just on par, right? It's just the renders just don't look like what other people do, and that has to do with the lighting. So here you can see that with just changing the position of your light, you can get more details. And remember that this is applicable to a lot of different rendering methods, right? So we have product renders. You want to show off your shapes, but you also might think of showing off certain features. If you have an on and off button, you want to show that, and it has to be done with positioning the light in the right way. If you have a creature and it has like a weird tooth or a scar that you want to show off, you have to show that with the right position of the light. And I can go on and on about this, but the position of light is important, and let's go on to the next part. When I want to explain something, I often want to have an image or something visual to explain it, because in my experience, I learn way better when I can actually see something or even touch. And the fun thing with teaching Blender and 3D is that we're already working with something visual, right? It is not something that I have to explain with just numbers or whatever. I can actually show you what I'm doing. In this case, I want you to understand hard light and soft light. And we are first going over a few cool images that I found on this website. You can also go on the link. I will just put it in the description down below. And what this essentially is it explains what hard and soft light is. And then I'll go into Blender and show you that all the things that we've talked about right now, which is in the real world, will also work inside Blender, because it's a ray tracing render, right? So what is the difference between hard and soft light? It is quite simple. If we look at the image on the left, we can see that the transfer from the shadow to the light is essentially quite abrupt. This transfer is called a shadow edge transfer. And if it's abrupt, or if it's very small, the fall off, then it is a hard light. If you look at the right, you can see a soft light. And you can see that the lighting from the shadow to the light is very smooth. This is called smooth lighting. The shadow edge transfer is very smooth, as you can see, and has a longer fall off. If you look at this image here, we can see a sun, or just a light, a shadow caster, and the ground. So this will be the object, and on the ground we will project the light and the shadow. If we look down here, you can see that we draw a line from the outer side of the light and draw it towards the shadow catcher. This area will be fully shadowed. But where does our light go? Well, we just draw a line from this outer side all the way towards the shadow catcher, and then this area will be fully lit. So you might already know that in between here we have our partially shadowed area, which essentially shows the shadow edge transfer. In this case, this is a soft edge. As you can see, it goes very smooth from the shadow till the lit area. This fall off is quite smooth, which creates a soft light. Now if we look a bit down, we can see that the shadow catcher has been put lower, and this also creates a sharper edge here, which you will probably know that now this will be way more abrupt than here. So this will essentially be a hard light, because this shadow edge transfer is very abrupt. Okay, so how do we actually create a hard or a soft light? As you can see, the distance between the light and the shadow catcher means a lot. If it is closer to the model, we can see that we get a very big shadow edge transfer. If it is very far away, we can see that it is quite small. Distance is not the only thing that matters, because the size of the lamp also matters. Here you can see that a very big light can create soft shadow edges, and a very small light can create a very harsh shadow edge. You might think now, but a sun is huge. It's so many times more bigger than the Earth. That is true, and it should create a soft shadow, right? But you can see that the sun creates a very hard lighting. This is because the sun is very far away from the Earth. So the size and the distance is relative to the object that you are lighting. Keep that in mind. So let's go into Blender, and we're just gonna look at if this is also true for our shadows inside Blender. So here we are inside Blender with a very simple setup. We have a little light here, which essentially is just a sphere with an emission node. And then we have a cylinder and a plane where we cast our shadows upon. So what we talked about is the smaller we make a light, you can see that the shadow gets more and more sharp. Right, so I have to put the strength a bit up, otherwise it's a bit hard to see. But you can see that this shadow edge here is quite abrupt. If I make this lamp bigger, you will see that now we get a way more smooth shadow edge. I will also put the strength a bit down because it's hard to see. You can see that now the transition between the shadow and the lit areas are way smoother, as you can see. So if you have a smaller light, you can see that we create some hard lighting. If you create a bigger light, we get some soft lighting. Does this also matter for how far our lamp is away? Right now we have quite smooth lighting. So if I put this away, you will see that we now, of course need to put this up again, get a hard shadow edge transfer again. So you can see that the distance and the size of the light matters. This creates hard or soft shadows. Right now you know how to create hard and soft light, and you know what they are. But what are the uses of them? The hard light has a very abrupt shadow edge transfer. It gives us a lot of definition between light and dark. Hard light creates highlights that are very bright and usually very defined, and also shadows that are sharply defined. In product photography, it's used to exaggerate small details and to make certain textures more apparent. But if you look at photography for humans, it's most of the time to get a more of an edgy and contrast in your images. So it could be a male athlete. Sometimes it's of course also used for women, but then you want to have a result with a bit more drama and contrast. Because it exaggerates small details, so it also exaggerates skin texture, wrinkles and acne. And this is why most of the time you use soft light for female or for soft forms, because you don't want those very, I guess, old looking details on top of the female model. But if we look at some outdoor scenes where you might have some rocks, then you of course want to exaggerate those small details. So hard light is very, very nice for that kind of stuff. So what do we use soft light for? So with soft light it's easier to create flattering images, and it does kind of the opposite of what the hard light does. It doesn't point out the small little wrinkles or details, and that is why a lot of people work with soft light, and especially in photography for humans, or even if you look at creatures, right? But if you look at creature design, there are some creatures that you really want to use some hard light with, because you want to show the scales or the wrinkles on top of the orc. But if you want a beautiful female character, you will probably use a more soft lighting setting. And also one thing you gotta remember is that light and shadow are both very, very important. You cannot have good lighting without shadows, so keep that in mind. The inverse square law. So let me actually make a little light here. Bam. I'm very bad at drawing, as you can see, but this is a light. Well, this is a light, way better. And we actually have some light rays shooting off of here. So now if we take a distance, which will just be 1, so from here till here, we have a distance of 1. And this 1, it doesn't really matter if it's 1 meter, if it's 60 centimeters, if it's like a foot, it doesn't matter. The only thing matters that if we take the next one here, that this will be 2 of these, right? And we can even go to 3, 4, 5, it doesn't matter. But let's imagine we put a screen here. So here we have a little square. And all of this light, which essentially just goes straight, but it goes in different directions, right? It goes straight, but different directions, will be cast on top of this square. But you will also be able to see that if we put a square here, to be able to cast all of these rays, we need to have a bigger square. So this square actually fits 4 of these small ones in here. And you can also calculate that. So 2 squared 2 is 4. 4 of these fit in there. And you can imagine that if all of this light, which is being cast on here, has to be casted on top of this one, you can see that the surface is way bigger and the light will be less strong, right? It will be less illuminated because the area is so much bigger. So let's even look at 3. So 3 square is 9. Bam, 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 bam. This is even bigger, and this will be 9 of these smaller squares, and you can see that now it even has more area surface to be lit up on. So then the light will be dimmer again. So let's go a little bit deeper into this. Inside Blender, you can see that I just put a lamp here, and then we have a certain fall off. So I have rendered this, so we can just look at it in Photoshop. So here's our light, and then we have this fall off here from the light. So let's actually put a number at all of these stops. So here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And as the name already suggests, we have to square them, the inverse square law. So 2. So if we grab our rekenmachine or calculator, whatever you want, what you can do is you can square all of these. So you can also do it out of your head, but if you're lazy, just 1, and then you can see this, square. And the square of 1 is 1, okay? So we don't really have to do anything. So here we have 1 divided by 1. Here it will be 1 divided by 4. And now, if you calculate these, you get a percentage. So if we do 1 divided by 1, we already know this is 1. And 1 out of 1 is 100%. 100%. 1 divided by 4 is 0.25. So if you want to, of course, make that percentage, you do times 100 is 25%. So between number 1 and 2, we will lose 75% of our light. We actually have less of a difference. So between the 125, there's a huge difference, right? Between light fall off. But if we look at 7 and 8, it is like almost diminishable. So why do we actually need to know this? Well, depending on where you put your light in the scene, you will have a different fall off of your light. And this can have dramatical changes in certain aspects of your scene. So let me show you some practical implications of the inverse square law inside Blender. The first thing that I want to show you guys is this background. I want you to focus upon this studio here. If we look at this wall, we can see that here it's almost yellowish. And here it gets darker and darker to almost orange. This has to do with the light. If you remember, if you put the light close to a subject, the fall off will be very noticeable. So if we want this more of an endless background, instead of you being able to see this fall off here, then we put it backwards. We of course have to put the strength up, and you can even play around with the size of the lamp itself. This of course will also change the shadows, so you gotta just play around with that and see what works for you. Okay. So right now you can see that the difference is way less than before. And you can put it even further back and increase the strength more. So let's go to the next part. So here you can see a scene with multiple subjects. Right now it's lit quite okay. That is because our light is quite far away. It could be further, to be honest, but we have kind of the same exposure on every one of these. Let's put them closer. Here. So if you look now, we can see that in this can here, the exposure looks quite okay. It's maybe even a bit overexposed. But if you look at these other ones, you can clearly see that they are underexposed and they don't have enough light on them to actually show off their colors. None of this is actually bad, but you have to be able to know why and how you do it. Because if you want to make a scary scene and don't want to make everything visible, you might want to, put your light closer so you can hide off stuff in the back. But if you want to show off all of these subjects at the same time, then you probably want to move your light back a little bit and make it stronger. And the last thing that I would like to show you is the hardness of the light. So right now you can see that there is quite a contrast between the light and the shadow. And this of course could be a choice to do, but if you move it a bit more back and of course put the power a little bit up, you will be able to see that now we see more of the face and the light is way softer. And this is the inverse square law. The surface of the object also has a lot to do with how you should light your object. So right now we can see that we have a Christmas ornament or a Christmas ball, and the only thing in our scene is essentially a spherical light. This does not really look pleasing to the eye. And why is this? Well, let's actually change the sphere. So I have, instead of the sphere, I'll put a plane here, And what I did is it's just a plane and it has a emission shader on it. So in photography this would be a light box. And what we can see now is that this looks way flattering, way more flattering than our other shape. Why is this? Well, it's sometimes hard to say why it is, but I think it has a lot to do with the nice highlight that we get, plus the highlight follows the shape of the ball. So we really can see what the shape is. But does this also work if our model is not that shiny, right? If it's more rough, so we can more diffused light. Well, let's look at it. I'm gonna put this roughness up, 0.4. You can see that this changes the whole lighting as well, right? The surface has now all kind of bumps on it, and what we get is a more diffused light. It looks okay, but let's actually change it back to the sphere that we had before. So here, plain light goes off, and we're gonna put the sphere light on. And here, after it has been loaded a little bit, you can see that this looks better than the shape from before. Okay, so what I also have here is something extra which is called a white card or a white fill card. It's just to create some extra highlights on top of your model. So this card, they used a lot in photography. What you can do is you could give it an emission, but if you don't really want to light up your scene anymore, then you can just keep it white, as I have here. I only have a diffuse, put it to white, and you can see that it reflects on top of our shape here. If we put this back to like totally shiny, you can see that it creates some very, very nice and cool highlights. The thing that you should take away with this part is that you should try to look at your model and really think also about the highlights and the shapes of your highlights. So do you want a more of a square shape, which is very, very handy for maybe cars, you can see it a lot, or is it a bit more diffused and do you want some more rounder shaped lights? There's nothing good or bad, but you could see what the difference can be at certain parts. So play around with it and have fun. The separation between objects. In the last part I already showed a background light or rim light to create some extra separation between the object and the background. But sometimes we also work with multiple objects, and how do you create a separation between them that looks also pleasing to the eyes? Well, right here you see 3 balls, and the light that we have here kinda just goes perpendicular in the front toward it. So we do not really get a lot of detail of like the shapes that they have, but also how far they are away from each other. Plus the separation is quite minimal. As you can see, there's just a little line here. If I actually show you the scene from the top, you can see that you might have not thought that it would have looked like this from the top, right? So what can you do in this case? Well, from the front it looks like this. I kinda made a little animation so it moves towards the side. So around frame 20, it is at a 90 degrees angle. And you can see that we have a way better separation between all of these balls. But now we kind of miss separation between this part and the background, right? So around here, I actually just brightened up the background to create also a separation between that and the ball itself. So you can see that there are multiple techniques to actually make the separation between models a little bit more pleasing. Plus, you can change multiple things to create also a separation between the subject and the background, right? So lighting has to do a lot with this. If you change the position of your light, we can already create more depth and separation between models. And you could lighten up your background or change the background to another color to actually separate it from the models themselves. Because if I select the studio back here, just create a new material and make it red, you can see that there is obviously now a huge difference between that and these, right? So that also creates separation. So now you've learned some cool techniques to create some separation between objects and the background. In this section, I want to explain to you guys the whole workflow from putting the camera in the right way to finishing all the way to a nice render. I don't think this is talked about enough, and that is why, of course, we are doing it here. It is quite simple, and the nice thing about this part of the section is that you guys can actually start working with me. I know before this there was a lot of just listening to me, just rambling about blah blah blah, but now all of the knowledge that you've gained before will be used in this practice, and all of the practices after this will also have this workflow in mind. So the first thing that I like to do is make actually a different collection for my studio, which include the camera, lights, and the studio, the background, let's say, and the studio. So right click, new collection, just rename it to studio. So if you start up Blender, you can see that you already have a light and a camera. I put these two in my studio section. Why do I do this? Well, to be honest, sometimes the studio gets a bit full, and if you want to edit something in your model, you can just hide the whole collection instead of having to turn off every single part of it. It's just very handy, it's easy, and I am 100% sure that you guys should use this. So, in the next section, we're going to talk about the camera. If you click on 0, you're actually in your camera view. So, you guys can already do this, and I will see you guys in the next part. Let's talk about the camera. So as you already know, when you click 0, you can go in or out your camera view. But how do we actually move our camera around? Well, you can just select the camera if you want to, and you can move it around with G. You can also go up here and actually change the location, rotation, or scale manually. But one of the best ways I know and I like to use is click on 0, go into view, and put on lock camera to view. So now this line is here dotted. So what does this dotted line mean? Well, if we now just move around, you can see that our camera actually moves with our view. So I can show you like this as well. If we look here at the camera, and I'm gonna move it around in this scene, you can see that the camera just moves with us, right, with the view. Very, very cool. So that is my favorite way to actually move my camera around. If you select your camera, you can go into the object data properties of the camera. And when putting down your camera, you obviously also want to know the composition of your camera, right? So here in the viewport display, you can actually put on some composition guides if you want to. If you want something to be in the center, now you have a dotted line here, and here is the center. You can use the thirds, which has been used a lot in movies and just normal photography as well. And you can use any of these intersection points for your camera. Very, very cool. Let's put it here for right now. Okay. You can turn this off if you don't want to see it, but let's talk a bit about these other options that we have here. So we have a lens and we have a type. Normally it's set to perspective with a focal length of 50. Perspective is mostly used because you have the option to go to orthographic, orthopanoramic, which actually only works inside cycles, panoramic, but normally you just use perspective. We have a focal length, and you can change the focal length if you would like to. If you put in a higher number, you can see that we zoom in. If you put a lower number, you can see that we zoom out. For portraits, we normally use around 50, that seems to be a good number. If you have products, maybe jewelry, between the 60 and the 70 might be good. And lower numbers are very good to actually show more on your scene. So if you have a landscape, you might want to show more, so you might want to zoom a little bit out, so use a lower focal length. This also works for architectural renders, or even if there are a lot of objects quite close to the camera and you want to show them all, then you can also use a focal length that is lower. Please don't feel constrained about any of these numbers. You can always just try out some new stuff, but this is kind of something to keep in your head. Then we have a shift. Let me actually go back to focal length of 50 and show you the shift. The first thing that you see here, or that you might think, isn't this just rotation? It's not really. Let's look at this little gap between the cube and the camera line. You can see that this gap is quite narrow. Let me put back the shift at 0 and actually rotate this. So rotate Z. You can see that now this gap is way broader. So it essentially keeps these parallel lines a bit more like they should be, and it shifts the camera. It doesn't rotate it. So keep that in mind. It can be very handy. We also have a clip start and end. What does this mean? Well, let me put the clip start a bit higher. And you can see that we are now starting to clip through our model. This is not really nice, and you can just change the clip start, put it lower, or you can put the clip end higher. That is also an option. This sometimes also happens in your viewport, so this clip start and end only has to do with the camera. With your viewport you have it in view, as you can see here, clip start and clip end. We can even change our camera. You have some nice presets here, as you can see. And normally we don't really touch any of these. One thing that I do want to show you though is the depth of field. For the depth of field to work, let's grab... I'm actually gonna duplicate another cube, move it to the back, and I want to show you how this depth of field works. I'm going to focus on our first cube, and I'm actually going into our viewport shading, so we are rendering. Now, if you put this f-stop lower, you can see that this cube here is out of focus and this cube is in focus. It starts to blur out. These options below actually change the shape a little bit of the blur, but the f-stop is the most important because the lower you put it, the more blur you get. So you can of course put a nice number which fits for your scene. So I could even create an empty, move the bit out here so you can see it, select our camera and do the focus object as an empty. So now we focus upon this empty, and what we can do is we can move this empty around. So I can move it here, and now you can see that the focus is around here, and this will be blurred and the focus will be more on this empty. So this will be less blurred. So these are the basics of the camera. But why do we actually start with the camera? Well, I want you to put your camera in position before you start lighting your scene. You know why? Well, let me show you. What if we want to render this part? You can see that it's totally lit wrong, right? It's just shadows. So that is why you first put your camera up and then you start to light your scene. So let's create our studio. It could be that you just want one floor, maybe you have already a landscape you want to render, then of course you don't really need to create this. But I want to show you if you have a product maybe, or just a object that you want to render, we need to create kind of a studio, right? So I am going to click on Shift C just so our 3D cursor is in the middle, create a mesh, a plane, and scale this a bit up. So you can move this down. And at this point your camera should already be in place, right? So I think our camera should be around here. And what you want to do here, you want to make sure that the studio or floor you are creating covers everything inside here. You could also render it without and create a transparent background, but that will be in the extras, okay? So right now you just want to select this edge here, extrude it upwards, and then you want to select this edge in the middle. Click on Ctrl B and create some extra bevels. So if you click Ctrl B, you can see that you can just slide it in and out. But if you scroll up or down, you can change the amount of edge loops that are going to be added. I'm gonna put mine here. And then we can still see some of these edges. If you just click on W and shade smooth, those edges will be gone. Cool. So now if you look from our camera view, you can see that this is not big enough. So you could do two things. You could rotate this, or you could scale it up around the x-axis. Both are good. It's up for you and what you really want to create in the end. So this is one way of creating a kind of a studio or a floor. And you can do loads of things here. You can give this a color, right? We can go in here, go to our shading, select our studio, click on new, And we can change the color. Maybe we keep it like bright, but then go a bit darker, so it's gonna be black. And then let's look in our viewport shading. You can see what this does. So we could change the roughness a little bit. And you can really play around with the floor underneath. You can even give it textures. Maybe it's like wooden planks. That could also look very cool. So now that we've created a floor or studio, so we're gonna rename this to studio. And we have our camera set right. Now in the next part we can start lighting our model. And we're just gonna do the 3-point lighting as we did before, because you guys already know a little bit what that looks like. I see you guys there. So we can start lighting our scene. And the first light that we have, which is already active, is going to be our key light or main light. I'm gonna rename it. And what I want to do is I want to illuminate this front face. So you could put it here and really emphasize only the front, but you can of course also put it a little bit more back. And then you have also a little bit of light on top. So I'm okay with this. This is good. So the key light is set, but now of course we need to make sure that the exposure is actually good. So when we put the key light, we want our exposure to be good as well. So let's change our exposure. Go here, color management, from Filmic to false color. And I want a bit more contrast, so instead of none, I'm going to put this to high contrast. You have to put the contrast before you're actually gonna change the exposure, because you can see that it changes a lot. If I have high or none, you can see that it changes quite much. Awesome, so we are going for the grayish kind, right? So we want gray, gray, gray. And what you want to do is go here to your lamp or light, and then change the power so we get our gray light. Here we have gray, and I wanted to keep it a bit high in the gray. Awesome, so this is what we are focused upon, and this is kind of grayish, a little bit higher, which I like. And now we can put our view transform back to Filmic, and here is our exposure. Awesome. So now we can start to add our other lights. Here, I'm gonna duplicate it, move it here, because I want to light up this shadow, right? If we hide this, you can see that there is a bit too much shadow for my liking. This is going to be the fill light. Click on 0, and the fill light has to be less strong, right? So I'm gonna put this to 200. Awesome. Now I'm gonna check if my fill light actually does something, so I'm gonna hide my key light, and you can see that it nicely brightens up this face. These two work great together. The only thing that I want now is some background lighting. Here, I just duplicate my key light again, move to the back, and this is going to be the background lighting. You can see that these shadows here are quite harsh. I don't want that, so I'm going to make my size way bigger, and I'm going to put the power down as well. In this case, I'm going to put it at like 150. Let's look if it actually does something. Hide the fill and a key. You can see that it nicely lightens up this part. So with a cube, it's of course a bit hard to really get some cool renders going. We might want to put it a bit more here, so it brightens up this part. But later on, we of course go render some other models, and then we can have some more emphasis on the rim light. Yes, so also rename this background or rim light. And here is our lighting setup. In the next part, I'm going to talk a bit about rendering this. I see you guys there. Rendering our model. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about Cycles and how it works. So Cycles kind of renders in tiles. So right now I'm rendering with Cycles. Our device is the CPU. We are rendering at 128 samples, and the viewport at this moment is 32. So what does all of this mean? So essentially, the higher you put the samples, the higher quality you have. And the viewport means whatever we see now in the viewport. That is at 32 right now. And the render, if you click on F12 or click on render, render image, you will see 128 samples. It doesn't matter where I am actually looking. If you click on F12, it will start rendering from the selected camera. So if I click on F12 right now, you can see that it starts rendering. And these little squares here, these orange squares, are essentially the tiles that we are talking about. So, how to speed this up? Because sometimes it just takes way too long. There are multiple ways to do this, and there are also multiple ways to create a nicer looking image. So let's look if we put this render at, I don't know, 10. We'll probably get a very shitty result. As you can see, we get a quite bad result. So what implies a bad result? If you look here, you can see that it's quite grainy. We have a lot of noise. So if I put this to 100, we will see a huge difference. I'll stop it right here because we cannot see any noise, right? So that is one way to get the quality up. You can also go to light paths and you can change the bounces per specific thing. So if you want the glossy to look better, you can go up. If you want your transparency shaders to be better, you go up. With this you can create more quality, but keep in mind that the higher you put any of this, also the samples, it will take longer to actually render. So you need to kind of find a sweet spot. And the sweet spot just depends on any render you're doing. So you have to play a little bit around with it. So let's talk a little bit about speeding up the process. There are multiple things you can do. You can change the device. So in my computer, my GPU is better than my CPU. If your GPU is also better than your CPU, you can go to Edit, Preferences, click on System, and then you can choose your GPU. So it will be CUDA for mine, and I have a GeForce GTX 770. It's quite old, but yeah, it works better than my CPU. So when you're rendering with a GPU instead of a CPU, also the tiles should change, okay? If we go here to performance, you can see that we have a tiles. So first we have threads, which with I put to auto detect, but you can also do it at fixed, and you can do more or less threads if you want to do something in between, or if you just want to have it rendered like full on. So let's look at the tiles. At this point I have 64 by 64. If you look at this little chart, you can see that 64 by 64 works quite well for a CPU, but 16 by 16 would work even better. You can see that the render times increase or decrease dramatically with the size of tiles we use. So right now I am going to look at the left part of this graph, and that's our tile size for the GPU. So I want to have the top one, which is 256 by 256. If I would render now, it will go way quicker, and that is one of the things that you should really keep in mind. So also a thing that is quite new, and there are multiple ones of these available, but there is something called denoiser. So let's look at it. It is here in the view layer properties, denoising. You can select it, and you can also change some options, but even if you just keep it at this, we can see that, let's render again at 10. Do you remember that we had that noise? If I now render this, F12. So what you can see now is that even with a lower amount of samples, we can still create a great looking render. So these are two great ways to speed up the process and get nice results. So of course this render kind of looks mwah, but this is all the basics that you need to know, and now we can start rendering some nice images. So get your GPU or CPU ready, and we're going to make some awesome renders. So I'll see you guys there. Rendering glass. It can be quite hard and difficult, but there are some cool ways to actually make it look good and in an easy and simple way. So here you can see what we're gonna create. It's quite simple. Actually the lighting is gonna be the background. We just have the world as a light in this case. I also put a light in here. It's not really necessary, to be honest, but we have these black cards, and those are very important, because let's delete them for a second. Look what we end up with. We just see almost nothing, right? So in rendering just pure glass, you really should try to get some contrast going. And as I already told you before, shadows are as important as light. So in this case, we need to create some shadows, or some black reflections. So you can start Blender, and we're just gonna go over this whole project. Okay, so you can join me with this. And the first thing that I do is delete the cube, and I'm going to import our OBJ, which is the glass. Right now it is huge. Sometimes this happens when you download it from or other programs or whatever. You can just scale it down and just make it. Normally I would like to do it a real world scale, but sometimes Blender has a bit of problems when you use too small objects, right? So I'm just gonna do something that looks okay right now, but normally you want to try to get to the right scale. How do you do that? Here, if you go to transform, you can see the dimensions, okay? So it will probably be like, I don't know, 15 centimeters, so something like this. It just totally depends on the model that you make and all that shebang. Awesome. So we have this here, and the first thing that I want to do is get some extra modifiers in here. Bam. And now we have a nice wine glass. Okay. So what's the first thing that we do after we have our model? We are going to create a collection. And put our light and camera in there. So let's go to our camera, and what we want to do is we want to make sure we look in the right direction, right? We want to see the model. So we are going to go here into view, lock camera to view, and I'm going to go here. So I kind of want to have a front view, and when you just move it like this, you can see that all of your location and rotations are like off with a few or millimeters or degrees. So the ones that are very close now to 0, you can put to 0. This X one is very close to 90, so let's put it to 90. And then this one's 0. And the Y and the X actually show us, yeah, this, right? If it's like higher or lower. So you of course also have a lot of empty space here. In this case, I will change the resolution of my camera. So you can go here into your output properties, and then you can change the resolution, the X and the Y axis. I'll put it at 960 by 1200. So now we can zoom in a little bit more, and I'm actually also not very happy with the focal length. I already told you guys I probably go a little bit higher with the focal length, around maybe 70. Maybe I even want to try 100 with products. And then we have to go back to the Y-axis. And what I also like to do here is I'm gonna rotate it a little bit, just so I can see the top rim. This rim here. It just has to do with the shadow that will give us later. I already tried this a few times out, so that is why I know. Okay, so let's say this is what we want. Awesome. Now we can start to create a floor. So before we ruin our camera, we're just gonna turn it off again. And now I can create a mesh, and I'm just gonna do a plane. Scale it up. And with this plane, I'm just gonna extrude it. And we normally extrude it like this, right? Let's look what this actually does. It does create a line in here, which is not what we want. But first we need to check the material. So this is going to have a material, which is just going to be glass. So you can delete the principal shader. This is going to be glass. So just add a glass node in there. And then this one I want to make kind of specular. Okay, so create a new one. I'm going to just delete the principal shader and make it glossy. So just a glossy node. Bam. And the glossiness is going to be all the way to the left. So let's go back again, and we can actually look at what we have. Bam. You can see that we can't really see a lot. That is a problem. This is because we are inside Eevee, and we should go to cycles. So cycles already works better. And now you can see that the part that we've created actually creates a huge shadow, which I don't want to see at all. So what I want to do is I want to move this part backwards, just so we can see the shadow. You're always able to create some extra bevels in here if it helps to get rid of that shadow part. So now I don't have any of those bevels anymore. So it's a little bit weird when you try to make a endless background. And this is what's just, sometimes you just have to play a little bit around. Most of the time you just put it up and you create some bevels, okay? This is one of the weird cases that it doesn't really work like that, because our floor underneath has a mirror-like surface. Okay, so our light. I already told you guys that we're not really gonna play around with lights. We're just gonna do what the background has, so the whole scene will get illuminated. I'm going to shading, and here we can go, instead of object, we can go to world. So let's go here to viewport shading, and you can see what this actually does. So if I put this color to way brighter, you can see that now we get a nice and bright color. Awesome. So front view, you can see that now we have this. Looks great. We have a very cool reflection here, which I like. And we have our wine glass, which is in the middle of our camera. Camera looks good and the light looks decent. But we can't really see it, right? There are no shadows or light to kind of separate this and set it apart. It just looks like we can see through certain stuff and we can't really see a difference between the glass and the back. How do we change this? Well, what we're gonna do is we're gonna create some of those black planes to create those dark lines here. Awesome. So just create a plane, gonna rotate it here, and we need to give it a new color. So here, go back to object, create a new color here, and I'm really just gonna use a diffuse, so I'm gonna delete the whole principal shader and just add a diffuse BSDF, and then we make this black. It doesn't have to be all the way black. You kind of want to avoid all the way black or all the way white, because that is not very realistic. So you can go a little bit higher. Okay. Now you can see that here we already get this nice shape in here. So you can move this part around, of course, rotate it a little bit, and this changes the shape that this black part has. So when you're happy with it, just duplicate it over. We want it the same one here. And now you can see that we really can see our glass taking shape. The only part is here on the top. I want that to be a little bit more pronounced. So I'm going to duplicate this, rotate it, bam, and then I am going to look for a way to make this look good. This one can be a little bit tricky, and you also don't want any of the reflections inside of your camera view. So make sure you fix that. And then now it is time to fix every little bit. So if you really want to move your camera now, you could still do it a little bit. I think I'm okay with it. Maybe I want to have this a little bit more pronounced. Then I think I have to go a little bit more like this. It could also be the thickness of the glass itself. So that's sometimes you just gotta figure out. But I like this overall. I want it a little bit more brighter, so into the world settings, I'm just gonna put it a little bit brighter. And here we have a way better result, and I really start to like this. You can also play around with the strength here, so maybe 1.2, and this will brighten up the scene as well. So if you're happy with your end result, then you can start to render, right? So I'll put this to GPU, I have my cycles, render at 128. I might put this a bit higher, maybe 250, and then I'm gonna put the performance to 256 and 256. These tiles, why do I do this? Well, we already talked about it before. This has to do because I choose a GPU. So let's say this is our render. Awesome. I want you guys to save it now, okay? Just to save as, and then as exercise glass or whatever. Because in the next part, we're gonna change the whole scene and we're actually gonna make a black background. It's gonna be very cool, and I'll see you guys there. In this exercise, you will learn how to create something like this. So you remember, we have the glass. So if we go inside Blender, we can already delete our main cube, go to File, Import, OBJ, and import our glass. Now what we can see is we have some water in here and also some bubbles, right? So let's first create the water. It's gonna be super simple. Just zoom in a little bit. You want to go into top to go into edit mode, and you want to select a certain amount of vertices. So yeah, it just depends how full you want your glass to be. So I'm gonna make it something like this. Click on Shift D and then just right click to make it snap back to its original position. But remember, now it is duplicated. So now click on P to separate the selection. So now you can see that we have this part separated. Very nice. I'm going to select this, extrude, scale inwards, extrude again, and then click on M to merge it center. And I will create some extra edge loops in here. Bam. So this is essentially going to be the water, right? We also want some bubbles, as you could see here. But let's make this water actually a little bit more sharp here around the edges. Something like this would work. Awesome. The next thing that we're going to do is we are going to create some of these bubbles. How are we going to create the bubbles? Well, let's get our wine bottle again here. And we are going to select again a few of these vertices. Around here will be okay. It doesn't have to be too specific. Now do the same, duplicate it and then separate it. And from the separation we are going to emit particles from here. And those particles are going to be our bubbles. So let's first create an object which is going to be the bubble. And what I will do is I will just add a mesh and I will do a icosphere. But then in here you can change it to subdivision level 1. It doesn't have to be a very high subdivisions because we're going to give it a shade smooth with W. And then it's essentially going to be super small. So you will essentially not see that it is not really circular. And yeah. So put this a little bit out of the way. I'm gonna put it a little bit lower as well. And we can rename this to bubble. Bubble. And now we're gonna select this part here. This is going to emit our bubbles. So here we are going to go into our particle properties and we're gonna click on plus. So this is going to be our emitter. And instead of emitting these halos, what you can see right now, we want to emit the icospheres, right? So in here, in render, render as, we want to render as object. Now you can select your object here into the object. The inset object is going to be our bubble. So now if we play it, we cannot really see anything. Why is this? This is because the scale just doesn't match. So you should look for a nice scale what would resemble like the bubbles. Don't go too big. Yeah, keep them nice and small, but yeah, just try to find a good size. And here you can see that if I play it, you can see these bubbles going. The problem is, yeah, they of course fall down because these particles follow the world settings inside Blender. And those kind of resemble what is happening in the real world. We have some gravity. And I just want to turn this gravity off. So I'm going in here, field weights, gravity to 0. And now you'll see that they don't fall down anymore because there's no gravity and they will go up. Awesome. Two things are happening here. Because they are getting emitted from the planes here, from the normals of the planes, you will see that they are going this way. It's kind of like an hourglass shape. And we don't really want that. So I'm going into velocity and I will change the normal to 0. Then I'm going here into the z-axis and I want to actually move the z-axis and do maybe 0.3. So let's play it and you'll see that my z-axis is not really set right. So the only thing I have to do is Ctrl A and then apply rotation. So now we should have really the z-axis. You can see that these bubbles start to go up. Awesome, so this is essentially all that we need. Now we just need to set the number of bubbles that we want, but also how high the bubbles go. So if you hide everything else, actually I'm gonna keep this only the water. Now you can see that the bubbles are going way too high, right? They should stay inside the water. So what we can do is we can just change the lifetime. So the lifetime means how long these particles will be alive. So we want them to die off earlier. Let's do 20 and let's look how high that goes. You can see it still goes a little bit too high, maybe 15. and 15 seems to work perfectly. Awesome! If you do not have enough bubbles, you put this number up. If there are too many, put them down. And of course the scale you could change here. We also want to turn off show emitter because we do not really want to see the emitter in our scene. We only want to see the bubbles. And the last thing that I want to do is I want to bake this. So if you go to your cache, you can see that you can bake this. I don't think you have to bake it for too long, maybe like 40 frames. So we can essentially put the end of this frames to like 50 or 40, and then we can bake it. So it's already done, it's very quick. I've baked everything, and now we can essentially start with our materials. So I see you guys there. The materials, they're gonna be super simple. So let's just go into shading, and we have our glass, of course, which we already know just has to be a glass material. Glass. BSDF goes into here, and that's essentially it. Can we see it? Not really. I will change our render engine to cycles, and now I am just going to put, yeah, very simple, a world node in here with an HDRI. It's going to be very simple. It doesn't really matter which one you use, it's just to see a little bit what is happening. It is often a little bit easier when you use a HDRI. Okay. Then, inside the glass. The thing is, if you duplicate something, which we did, and then keep it at the same place, we often get some of these overlapping vertices. We don't want them, so you want to scale this part just a little bit down. See what changes? Now we can actually see this inner part. Otherwise it is like, yeah, inside of the glass. We don't want that. So that is essentially good. Go to this object. This is going to be water, but it will also be from the glass modifier. So we can essentially duplicate this glass modifier and just put the IOR to 0.3, so 1.3, something like that. And then for the bubbles, it's going to be exactly the same as the water. So select your bubble, then we're going to put, yeah, the water modifier in here. So super simple. These textures are, yeah, we can't really go any simpler, right? We have like one node. That's kind of it. So I think because the textures are so simple, we can instantly go to, yeah, creating the environment. Okay, so I wanted to delete my environment node here. It was just to check the materials. I'm going to create a plane. This is going to be our studio. Extrude this. And then I want to create some extra bevels in here. I'm going to do it like this. B, then shade smooth. Very cool. It's as easy as this. We did this before, right? And now I want to grab my camera, move my camera in the right position. So go to view, lock camera to view, move it a bit around, somewhere around here. And select the camera, 0, 0, look backwards, 90, 0, 0. And we can see that we have a lot of empty space here. Plus I probably want to change the focal length. So I'm going to change the focal length to 100 or 100, something like that. And 100 seems to be okay. Now of course we need to move a little bit backwards. And I want to change the resolution as well, because we have a lot of empty space and I don't think I will do anything special with this. So I'm gonna change the resolution a little bit. So to change the resolution, go to output properties, and in my render I made it a 1920 by 2400. Okay, we can move this back. And as last, I kind of want to rotate it a bit more like this, maybe like 80 degrees, and then just move it up. Yeah, that must look cool. Okay, awesome. So let's say this is what we want. Now, what we saw here in our image is that we have a very cool divide in here. right? And you can also see it in the water, but this is actually, it's being done automatically. We don't have to do anything special in here, right? So what I want to do is, I want to select my studio, Ctrl R, and create an extra edge loop here, just perfectly in the middle. And then I want to select this and go all the way over here. Bam, select all of these. Gonna click on P and then selection. So this part is separated now. And what I'm going to do is I'm gonna make sure that this is a light source. So this is gonna be an emission, and this is just gonna be a nice black and reflective surface. So go into shading, and then we can go back here into object. Gonna select this and new. We can rename this something like black floor or black studio, doesn't really matter. I will just put the base color at quite dark, so black kinda ish, and then the roughness is gonna be very smooth, as we can see here. And this is already cool, awesome. And then this part is going to have a new one. This is gonna be emission studio or floor. Delete the principal shader and just add a emission node. Now if you look for my camera view here, we can see that almost everything is working except our water. It seems kind of weird. So I actually think that the normals are kind of flipped. So you can check this if you go in here and look at face orientation. You can see that this is red and it's supposed to be blue. So as I already suspected, the normals are flipped. So you just go into top, select your whole model or everything that is red at least, go to mesh, normals, and then recalculate outside. Okay, so now if you put this back to normal, like turn off the face orientation, unhide everything, look into your rendered view, you can see that now it is finally working the way it's supposed to work. We do see that some parts are a little bit weird and laggy. That is because this water is still too big, so just make it a little bit smaller, and here you can see that it just vanishes, right? Those weird spots just vanished. So if you look now, you can see that it looks actually quite good, right? So we can change certain stuff here, which is totally fine. We can make the bubbles smaller, as I already told you. We can add some extra lights or even black cards or black or white cards also. And the one thing that I would check now is if the exposure is still okay. So yes, so go into color management, look if we have our fast color here, and I will play a little bit around with the emission of this backlight here. But yeah, that's the only real thing that I would try to play with, because overall it just looks good the way it is. I hope you guys learned something from this. And as you can see that if you add small details, so like these bubbles, if it is like sparkly water or champagne, well, if it would be champagne, you also would change the color of the liquid inside, of course. But the more small things you also add to your image animation, you could make it look more realistic or even more pleasing. And it also shows what the model actually is. So right now you would not think this will be still water, right? It would be sparkly water. So if you have a company that wants to sell sparkly water, add some bubbles or whatever. So please send me your renders if you're gonna render this. It doesn't take too long. And yeah, I'm looking forward to see them. And good luck, guys. See you. So here we are, ready to create our materials for the medical bottle. And the one thing that you have to do, just download the textures plus the OBJ of the model itself, and I will show you how we approach the materials. They are not hard at all, so let's just start. Here, go into File, Import, and we're going to import our OBJ, medical dropper, and it's going to be this one. I'm going to click on Import OBJ, and we can kind of delete this one here. You can see that mine already has some materials. I'm just going to delete them and show them from start. So this is going to be all the way white, this away and this away. And how do we approach this? Well, I like to be inside cycles already, because we're going to make our most realistic images with cycles, right? So GPU. And here is our lighting. It's just very simple. It is just what is basic inside Blender, right? When you start Blender, our lighting is already there. And I'm going to keep it at that for right now, because I want some light to actually show in our viewport shading. So let's start here with this bottle. Click on new, and this is going to be a glass. So let's look at our principled shader. The first thing that we need is of course some transmission. Glass is transmissive and we want to show this. So you can see that now it starts to get all the way black. This is kind of weird. If we look at our viewport shading, you can see that there's an HDRI automatically behind it, and now we can kind of see through it. This just has to do with how the background and everything reacts with the transmissiveness. So if we also put this lamp behind here, you will be able to see that now we can kind of look through our model, right? So that is kind of what you got to keep in mind sometimes with materials, is that not every material reacts the same on the world around you. And one great way to just check your materials quick is a very simple light setting. Maybe you want to create a little studio, or you're just gonna add an HDRI. That is also a great way. So you could essentially delete this one and enter an environment texture in here. So just open an HDRI. Where we would see a bottle, maybe this one. And here we can see kind of what is happening. So that could be a great way to actually look at your model, okay? Don't overdo it, don't think already too much about the lighting, but you do want some light to actually create your materials in a realistic way. So let's go back to our materials, and here we are at our glass material. The only thing that I changed here is the color, which I actually took this hex code for, so if you want it, it's just this one. And I changed the roughness to 0.4. So here we can see it's kind of a browner kind of glass. They also use this kind of glass for beer. You can use green or brown, and it just, I think it keeps out UV light from changing any of the liquid that is inside of the bottle. So that is kind of why they use these kinds of colors. And right now we're going to create the black plastic. But the black plastic is literally just a principal shader towards a more black color. Then we have a roughness, which I wanted a little bit more shiny, so I'm going to 0.3. And now I want to add a bump node. So what we're gonna do here, I'm gonna add a bump node. So bump, normal goes into the normal, and I'm going to add a noise texture. Bam. So what does this do? I can actually show you very easily if I actually put this noise texture inside the color. So you can see that the color gives us a colored kind of trippy pattern. If you do the FAC, you actually get black and white. So that is what we want. So now I want to change some of these values. Put this at 0. And now let's look at it in height. And now let's change this FAC. It goes into the height. And if you go to your viewport shading, you can actually see some height in here. Very, very cool. So you can see that this is obviously way too big. So I did the scale at 250. And here you can see that it is smaller. So that is good. Strength is just a little bit too much. So I put the strength at 0.02. And here you can see it is very subtle. But this subtleness actually makes our material look way better. And then we have our rubber. So it's just a principal shader, and you want to put the color to a more of a black color. And now we're just going to play around with the roughness. I'll put it a bit up because I want it less shiny, let's say. In my opinion, this rubber does not seem very realistic. So what I did with the rubber is I created an image texture. And what I opened in here is a grunge map. So let's go to the grunge map. It is this one. It is just a grayscale map, the color into the roughness. Bam. Make sure you put the color space to non-color. This you normally do when you have a grayscale map, something like that. The problem here though, you can see here, and that is that our texture map is not being projected in the right way. as you can see here by the line. So let's get a texture coordinate node and a mapping node. You can just combine these together. So object goes into the vector, and the vector of the mapping node goes into the vector of the image texture. And if you want to check your texture, you can always put it inside the color of the principled shader, create a color ramp, and put it in between the image texture and the principled shader. Now you can move around the little stops that you can see. And you can of course make it more or less subtle. I want it very subtle, so just put it in the roughness map and then keep it as subtle as possible. So you want to do this. I really like what this effect does, but do not overdo it. When you're rendering products, you want to sell the products most of the time. And you do not want any scratches or dirt on products that you sell. Even though scratches and dirt, as you might already know, do make your renders look more realistic. So you want to do the same techniques as making your model look realistic, but you want to make them very, very subtle. So this is not really a scratch on there, because I will never do scratches on a product that I want to sell. But what I would like to do is make the material more realistic. So use reference images for what the material actually looks like. And a lot can be done with only roughness maps. And then make it very subtle so it still looks fairly new. Okay? So do it very subtle, but you can see that there's a huge difference if I use this kind of shading or this. Right? It just looks more pleasing. So I like to use this. And as last we have here our little label. Only thing that I did is create an image texture. Color goes into the base color. Bam. And we open this texture. It's gonna have a different name. It's gonna be medical bottle, something like that. And then you have your little label on top. Amazing. So this is very simple, as you already could see. And this model is also super simple. Like it's not even fully done yet, to be honest. But we don't really need to, right? We have like an exercise that we're gonna do, and you will see what the lighting does to your scene. So in the next part, you will learn how to light the scene. We're gonna use two models, so it's gonna be a little bit of a different camera. We're going to use two models, as you can see here, and we're gonna play a little bit around with the depth of field. And we have a different kind of background that we normally did. So yeah, you will learn a lot of stuff. And then the part after that, you will learn even more, because we're gonna use the same model and create a whole different kind of scene. So this is kind of how you get to know multiple ways to render the same product and get a whole different outcome. Very cool, and I will see you guys in the next part. So this is our exercise. We are going to make this. And what I want you guys to look for here is how to recreate this. So I know recreating sometimes feels like a little bit of cheating, but you should not feel like that at all, because you should actually do this more often. If you try to recreate certain stuff from prose and maybe even from images or photography, then you can really up your work. Trust me on that one. Because you can see some certain differences between your work and their work. And then once you get to know your own work and you can get to see what you're actually not that good in, or where you maybe need to improve in, or maybe some of your strong points, then you can build upon that. Also, what you start to see is how lighting works. So this course is all about lighting, and the philosophy that I actually am talking about kind of works on everything in life. But with lighting specifically, you can already start to see some of the lights that are being used in this scene. And what will also happen here is you will start to combine multiple of the lessons that we have talked about before. So here we have more of a rough surface area. And we already talked about the certain lights that work well with a rougher surface area. But you can see that this is way more shiny. So how can we combine these together? And sometimes you just have to make a choice, and it will not work perfectly on each and every single part of a model, but overall it will look good. So sometimes you just have to pick and choose. What we also can see is that we have two of the same models, of course, but one is out of focus. It makes it look more interesting. What you also can see is that the background is also different than what we have used before. We actually have a color in here now and a different kind of floor. It is still very, very basic, as you can see, because it's just a white floor and a pink background, right? But I think when we start with these simple lessons, we will start to build upon everything, and you will start to get to know how you should combine all the knowledge that you have learned before. Because now it's really starting to make some sense, and you can shape your light essentially the way that you want it to be. So let's go into Blender. Here we are. And the first thing that we're going to do is just create a plane, which is going to be the floor. We can scale this a bit up, and I want to put my model so it gets placed right on this plane here. So I like to go to the bottom a lot of times to just see how high I am, and around here should be good. Awesome. Now I would like to place my camera. So we talked about before, first you place your model, right? Then you could or change your camera or expand a little bit upon your studio, but we're gonna do the studio later. So first it's the camera. View, lock camera to view, and I just like to go a little bit to the front. So here, you guys already know my little technique. I like to do lock camera to view, then go back into item and put these transforms where they should be. Let's bit up. This is going to be a 90, 0, 0. And here we are at a decent place. So it is a product. I like to use a bigger focal length for my product. So I'm going to put this as 100 for right now. And then I have to go back here. What you can see here that we are not using the resolution that we can see here. Why not? Because there is a lot of empty space. Even if you zoom in, you will see that the empty space is quite enormous, and yeah, there's no need for that in my opinion in this case. So I'm going a bit back. I have a focal length of 100, but if we go in here into your output properties, you can change the resolution. So the resolution that I set is 1080 by 1350. Here we can already see that we of course need to zoom in a little bit more. And what I talked about before is that we want to have two of these models, right? So I'm gonna grab all of these here, and I'm just going to duplicate it and put them towards the back, somewhere here. You can always change this, by the way. You can put it further back or less far, and yeah, just don't put it up or down. You know, it has to stand on that floor. So now our camera is kinda not in the right space. So what we're gonna do is I'm actually gonna grab my camera here, and I'm gonna put on some of the composition guides. I like to do thirds. So here we have our thirds. I'll move my camera to the right so the thirds actually fit in both of these models. Bam, you can see that the thirds, like these intersect on all of these places. So our positioning is quite right. So now I like the way that this is positioned. I'll put the lock camera to view off so I cannot move it by accident. And this is kind of what we are working with. Very, very cool. So as we already talked about before, we have a floor plane and a plane in the back. So I'm just gonna duplicate this, rotate it, move it to the back, scale it up. Don't be afraid to just scale a bit with these. I'll also scale this one a little bit up. What you can see in my image here is that the floor actually goes to around here. So it's like, if we look at this bottle, it will be more than half. So if you want to have the same, just scale it up and then move your background further away till it is in the place where you want it to be. I think I want to tilt my camera a little bit, so I'm going to tilt it around the x-axis just a little bit, then move it up. Maybe at 85 degrees. And then I'll move this one a little bit more back. At the beginning, it's just really figuring out what you like. Yeah, around this looks way better. Now I'm actually starting to like my scene. I'll put my camera a bit closer. You can see it's a lot with camera. I'm still playing around with it. Yeah, and then you can of course put your position guides on again if you think it might not be right. Yeah, I'm quite happy with this. Might put it a bit more to the right, just so there is less empty space here. Like these two spaces are around the same. Something like this. Awesome. Okay, let's build upon this. Now we can start with our lights, right? We have our floor, we have this floor here, we have our two of our models, and then our camera is also set in the right position. But what about our lighting? Well, the first thing that we did in our last part is we actually created a environment light, and I don't want that at all in this part. So I'm just going to disconnect it, and I want to focus upon the lights that I'm going to put in the scene. So let's add our first light. It's just going to be a point light. Why a point light, you might ask? Well, you can also play around with a plane, but in my opinion, the reflections of the rougher areas work nicer if there is actually a point light. And you can see that even with the less rough areas, so the more reflective, more shiny areas, the reflections actually are nice and square, even with the point light. And we are going to recreate that and have these nice highlights which actually follow the shape. Okay, the shape of the model. Okay, so go into your camera view. And what you can do is you can move this around and you can actually change this whole area here, this whole tab, to 3D viewport. So here we are. We have two different screens, and what I like to do in this case is change certain lights or maybe even move models around in this screen and keep this one at the viewport shading. So here we can see what is actually happening. One little tip is if you use Ctrl B, we get a little box selection, and if you just click and drag, you can select an area on your viewport. Now, if I release my mouse button, you can see that the only thing that will get rendered is inside of this selection. This is very handy because now Blender has to render way less of our whole viewport. If you want it back to the original, Ctrl Alt B will just return it back. But I'm going to keep it here for right now. I'm also going to put my viewport a little bit down so my screen will not get too laggy for you guys. Okay, so as I said, we have some lighting in here, and this is because if you go to the world settings in our shader editor, you can see that we still have our H0i, right? This was to check our materials, but right now we don't need it anymore, so I'm just gonna boop, turn it off. And everything is black. That's okay. I also put this color a little bit down, because normally it's around here, but I wanted my blacks to be a little bit darker, so I just put this down. Now, what we want to do is we want to start adding lights. So I'm going to click on Shift C, just so my 3D cursor snaps back into the middle. And now I'm going to add, with Shift A point light. I want my main light to be around here. This is kind of on the left side of our camera, and it will be on the right of our model, right? So if we look at it from our model's perspective, it will be on the top right. For the camera, it will be the top left. So we are going into our object here and actually use some nodes. And I want the strength to be way more up, right? I want to see our models. Very good. Here we can see them and they look okay. The one thing that I do not really like here, that is this sharp shadow edge transfer, right? We want more of a soft lighting. I want this to have a more of a feminine feel. You could also see it with the pink background, which we're also gonna create. But let's first focus on our main light. If you guys remember correctly, we just have to select our light and then make it bigger. I'm gonna put it at around 4. You can see that the shadows are way softer. But what we do not really have is any nice highlights. I'm gonna put my strength a bit up to see if we can actually create some highlights. Sometimes you even have to put your model a bit closer or put it in a different position to create some of these highlights which I want. Around here seems nice to me. So now we have our main light, right? So here, key light or main light, you can rename it to. Once we have our key light, we want to check our exposure. So what do? We go here into your render properties, and then we're gonna play around with the color management. I put the look at very low contrast because I want it to be very soft, more feminine. Now, in the view transform, we have filmic. I'm gonna put this to false color, and now we can see what's actually happening. You can also see that the false color works great, but it works different for each material. Why is that? Well, it has to do with the color of the material, plus how reflective it is and all of that shebang. So, now we gotta keep in mind, we want to light up our scene, but we don't want to overlight or underlight any of these. We are looking for this gray line, as you already remember. I'm actually gonna put my strength a little bit up, maybe at even 300 or more. We are almost reaching red in here, which would be too much, but we also are getting some gray everywhere. And a gray, yeah, is good, right? So we might want to put it a little bit higher. And around here, I would think we are getting a little bit too high, but let's look at it in our filmic. And yeah, we can still read our text. That is very good. You don't want to overexpose it so we can't read our text anymore. We have nice highlights. I like what our light is doing. So as every light, if you turn it on and off, there is a difference. This light has a purpose. Now we want to put our second light. And in our other parts we kind of talked about the fact that we first use a main light, and then this main light actually creates some shadows. So we want to use a fill light to light up these shadows. But in this case we cannot even see what material this glass is made out of. I am saying now glass because I know I am creating glass, but does it really look like it? It might as well be plastic for the viewer's eye. So I want to first add a backlight. I'm going in the top view, just duplicate our main light and put the backlight somewhere around here. Now you can see that it starts to make sense. This actually has a different color now, right? I'm gonna edit this backlight a little bit and also rename it. I want it a little bit smaller, so maybe at 3. And what I also would like to do is maybe put the strength a bit down. Okay. The position of the light is also very important. If I put it very close, you can see that we create some extra highlights or maybe even a rim light. The problem is, if you create it too close, you might get too much attention on this model in the back. And we want our eyes to focus on top of this model, not the one in the back. So this is why I put it quite far here. But this is totally up for debate. Like, it's not something that is good or bad. It's just my thought pattern behind this particular render. Okay. So, let's look what the difference is if we have this line on or off. You might agree that this has a huge difference. And you of course can play around with this as much as you want, but we can see that now the material has changed a lot, and we can actually think of this as a different material than just the plastic that we have here. So our glass is actually visible now. In this particular model I do not see too many shadows to fill up, so our fill light might not be certainly a fill light, but we could add another light to actually brighten it up a little bit, but also to create more highlights. So I'm going to duplicate this, move it here, and for this particular one I will make it of course a bit smaller. And the funny thing is that if you make this light smaller, we also get a more defined or even a thinner highlight, as you can see here. And I will also put this strength a little bit down, and we don't need that much light from this particular light. So 50 is too low. I want to see the highlight. So at around 100, maybe 150 in my case will be okay. And here we are already getting a very, very nice scene. So the background and the floor we actually did not change. I kind of forgot that. So I'm gonna create a new material, get rid of the principled shader and just use a nice diffuse node in here. So diffuse goes in here. I am using this hex code. You can copy it if you want to. And for the floor, I think if we just get a nice diffuse shader in here as well, diffuse, it might already be good. Yeah, I kind of like this. So this is quite okay. You might want to make it a bit darker so we have more of a separation between the floor and these bottles. That is also fine, of course. But it's totally up to you, whatever you want to create. The last thing that I want to show you is select the camera, go into depth of field, and we're gonna create a depth of field. So I put the focus object as this one here. You might want to put it at the part that has actually text on it so we can read the text for sure. And then you have a certain f-stop. The lower you go, the more blurry the background will become. So if I put it at 0.1, you can see that it gets very blurry. So around 0.5 worked well, but it depends of how far this model is from your focus object. I hope I explained why I put the lights in a certain spot. And if something is not clear, please just ask down below, because I want to make it clear to you guys, okay? And yeah, send me the renders. I want to see you, maybe give some feedback, and I'll see you guys in the next part. Welcome to this new exercise. So now we are going to create something like this. So we essentially have the same model as in the last exercise. We have a little variation on it, and we have something in the background, something interesting. The thing is, these are palm leaves. So coconuts grow on palm leaves, so they have something to do with the coconuts, and that was just a small little touch that I really liked. What we also have here is we have a different surface on top of our glass. So we might want to rethink our lighting. And I hope in this exercise you will really learn a lot of different things and combine everything that you have done in the last part. So let's just start and get into some of the materials. Here we have our scene, and you already know that you can just download this one. You already made it in the last exercise, right? So just take that medical bottle. We only have to change one thing, and that is put this roughness to 0.1. That's it. Now it's a more of a glossy surface. We have two other models here, which is going to be the medical top, which is the smaller little bottle, and the plant. So for this, it's going to be very simple. This lid is going to be the black plastic that we have created before. And for this glass, we are just going to put our glass material, right? So very, very simple. For this one though, I want to grab our label material, which is this. But you can see that, yeah, it doesn't really fit on here. And I have created another label for you guys for especially this little bottle. So just click on this duplication, then just rename it to medical top label, and we can change this. So here you can see we have a label medical top, and that's the smaller one. As you can see here, that's the big one for the bottle, and this is for the little top. That's this one. Bam! And now this fits. Great. You can also see that I've put an empty on each one of these. Let me actually delete the empty and show you how I did this, because I don't want to move all of these pieces. I just want to move one empty around and have everything attached to it. So if you just go to the middle of your model and click on Shift A, you can add an empty plane axis. It is a bit small, so I'm gonna scale it up, and now I'm gonna select every single part of this model, and then as last the empty. So the empty is orange, as you can see. Control P, and now set parent to object. So now I can just move only this empty around and everything will move with it. The last thing that we need to do here is actually create a material for this leaf. I'm gonna click on new, and I'm gonna add an image texture. Image texture goes into color, color goes into base color, open, and we're going to open this palm leaf. Bam! And here is essentially our texture. I personally put the roughness a little bit up, just so I don't really have any reflections that gonna interfere with our scene. It totally depends. Normally they are of course way more shiny, and also we have some translucentness, but in this case I'll just put it a bit up so it doesn't annoy us with lighting our scene. So in the next part we're gonna grab our camera, our background, and we're gonna start rendering our scene. I'll see you guys there. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So we can start to create our scene essentially, right? First thing that we're gonna do is add a camera. Most of you already have a camera. I kinda deleted mine by accident, so I need to put my camera here. And you can see that these proportions are maybe different than yours. So if you go here into your output properties, you can see what the resolution of my camera is. 1080 by 1350. Now I go to lock camera to view and I want to just look at it from the top. Here I'm gonna put it into its place, 0, 0, and then the z-axis should be good. Now I don't want any rotation on here, so 0, 0, and 0. Awesome. When I select the camera here in your object data properties, you can go down and we can actually put some composition guides in here. So I like to do thirds just so I know where to place my model. Now you can turn off lock camera to view and we can just move it however we want to, just with GZ, right? So just as in the last part, I like to make this also a 3D viewport just so I can work in here and then look at my render here. We're gonna create a nice floor in here, so a plane. It's gonna be big, and we can also already give this a color. I'm just gonna do a new material. I'm gonna delete the principled shader and just add a diffuse here. I put it a little bit brighter, but we'll look later how it actually looks. I'm going to keep it at this for right now because I want to see the size of all of my models when they are turned. So I'm gonna start with my medical bottles, okay? So I'm first gonna just hide off my medical top, just gonna start with my medical bottle and put it into place. So we all know that we want to read the text, right? So coconut oil should be on top, and then I'm gonna put it somewhere high. The thing that I want us to keep in mind is the leaves should be like low, right? And then the leaves should be lower, and then the bottles should be above them. I think our camera is a bit too close, so I'm gonna click on GZ to have them a bit smaller, something like this. And then of course we need to scale up our background, and then yeah, this starts to look good. Let's move our bottle a little bit around, and I want to put like one bottle right here, and then one bottle at the other intersection of these thirds from the camera, right? So these are the composition guides, thirds. I'm gonna put my other one there. So how do we duplicate this? You just select every single part of this model, and then as last the empty. And now if you duplicate it, you can literally just keep moving this empty around, and all of these parts of this model will actually be parented to only that empty. So that's good. And I'm gonna put this one here. I'm gonna rotate it a bit. Like that. And this already looks very interesting. Cool, so I think we are far enough away. Our camera is set up good. And then we can put in our last little medical top. Here. Rotate this a bit around. We actually want to see the text. Okay. I think they're a bit too close. I might want to move it a little bit here and then make it a bit more interesting with some movement in it. So like this maybe. And yeah, you can always move them a little bit further away if you think they are too close to each other. But that's totally up to you. This should be kind of the feeling that we have. Okay, so from the side you can see that they're quite high. It doesn't really matter too much, but they could go a little bit lower, I think, something like this. And then we can think about how many leaves we want in here, right? So, if we just look at our camera, I personally had 3 in my render, but it doesn't really matter. You can do 1, you can even don't do any of them, or you can just do 2, which also can be cool. I would rotate it a little bit though, so maybe rotate it around this axis here, just so they don't look too much like each other. Maybe make a bit smaller. But all of this is up to you, and I would really like to see some differences. And yeah, you can move them, try different leaves, whatever. Just try some stuff out, whatever you think looks cool. Okay, so I am going to make this a little bit bigger so we can actually see what is happening here. And now in the next part we can start with our lighting. So our scene is set up, this is what we wanted, and now we can really start lighting our scene, alright? We have our models, we have our studio, let's say, our camera is set up right, and now we can start with our lighting. I'll see you guys in the next part. Welcome to the last part of this exercise, and what we're gonna do here is we're gonna add some lights to our scene. The surfaces that we have are very glossy, so I want to accentuate those shapes, and I'm gonna do it with planes. You guys might already remember why we do it. A lot of times it gives just better highlights. So we want to, of course, make sure this is gonna be an emission. So we need to create a material. You can do light, delete the principal shader, and get an emission node in here. Emission goes into the surface. And now when we click on viewport shading, we can see that we are rendering everything. It is still gonna be quite black, it seems. So I'm gonna put the strength to 200 just so we can see something. Now I'm gonna click on Ctrl B to select only this part. I don't want to render all the other parts yet. And now I am also gonna put my viewport down. You guys don't have to do that. I just need to do it because I need to record this, of course. So, our lights, what are we going to do? Let's first look at our image. The first thing that you can see, I want nice highlights on here. On all of them, actually. I want an infinite background, which is just this white. It's just infinitely the same color, which I want. And, of course, we have these leaves here, which also need to be lit a little bit. But that's essentially what we're going for. So, highlights, and we want an infinite background. So, let's rotate this little light here, and I think I put my main light on the left side. Doesn't really matter too much, whatever works for you, right? And we're already getting some highlights, as you can see here. I am only getting highlights on this part, so maybe I need to make it even bigger. You can see that moving it a little bit further away, making the highlights bigger, we actually also project them on all of these models. But we are overlighting our whole scene. So let's put this down to like 50. Now we can move our light again and start to find a place where it will look good. I think it should be even bigger. Now we're finally also getting some reflections and highlights on top of this model, because those were missing. But we are too close, so I'll put it a bit further away. And also here we need to play a little bit around with our light so it reflects on all of these models. We might even want to make it even bigger, as you can see. But it is already so big that our exposure is obviously wrong. Of course we're gonna do the exposure later on, but right now I want to see what is happening. So maybe put it to 10. And this already looks way better. I'm actually kinda liking this. Creating a big model here will of course create these nice highlights. But why do we have to put it so far away from our models? Well, you might remember the inverse square law. We want this background to be kind of the same color all of the way. You can of course see that we have some shadows from our models that are casting on here on the leaves. But it is not that much of a difference. If we would have made this smaller, smaller and closer, you can see that there is a huge difference between this brightness and here, right? So this is also the reason why we create the light this far away and a little bit bigger for the highlights and for the inverse square law, so it works in our favor. Now we want to set our exposure. So go here into the render properties, go down to our color management, and I put this at the medium low contrast, so not very low as we did the last time, that this is going to be medium low. And now put this to false color and we can see what's happening. So obviously we are going more towards the red, which is a bit too much. So now just put the strength of this down. If we look at 3, we have some red here. It is not becoming white yet. I am looking for gray though, and gray seems to be on this side, so I might put it a bit lower. Now we have a nice gray line here. So around 2 seems to work okay. Let's look at our filmic, and we can see that it is lit quite well. I would like it a little bit more brighter, but you can always do this also afterwards, or you can put this a little bit higher, so maybe 0.3. But you don't want to overdo this lighting, remember? Now, this is going to be our main light. So this here. Main light or key light. And we're gonna use a nice fill light here. And I want an extra light in here. I'm gonna move it here. Why do I move this here? Well, I moved here because I also want a reflection on the other side. I think it looks very, very cool. I'm gonna make this one a bit smaller though. Move it here, rotate Z, and then look for the reflections in our bottles. And around here we actually get some nice reflections. Of course, when I'm making my final render, as you could see here, I put some extra time into this and I really want to make it look good. But what you can see is that the lights and lamps that we have here are actually doing a lot for our models. You can see that we have nice highlights, they follow the shape, and it looks good. I would probably make this one a little bit smaller though, because I think this highlight is a bit too big. But overall, you get the sense of what we're trying to do here. I think it is just not bright enough, so I'm gonna put this even a bit more up, so maybe even 3, just to have some brighter highlights. But overall, it looks very, very nice. The last thing that I would do here, I would select my camera, go into Object Data Properties, and go to Depth of Field and select one of these bottles. I'm gonna select the middle one, and I want some depth of field in here, so I put this a bit lower, just so there is less focus on top of these leaves in the back. So maybe 0.5. And this is kind of the render that we are trying to create. We want nice highlights. We want an infinite background, which we created with a bigger light, but also put it quite far away, if you remember correctly. And we have something interesting happening here. We're using our composition guides, and our scene, looks fresh, it looks inviting. We have fun colors in the back, so all of it kind of comes together and creates a fun vibe and something interesting. I hope you guys learned from this. If there are any questions, please comment down below, and of course send me your renders. I'll see you guys in the next one. Welcome guys. So in this part we are going to create this bottle. The text is a bit weird of course. I just wanted to do something fun. But yeah, we're gonna create some liquid ass in Blender. And as we can see here, we have a very cool floor, which is actually not a texture or anything. It's literally like a simulation in Blender, and we're gonna do that in part 2. But first we're gonna focus upon this model. This model is already provided for you, so you can just download it. And now we're gonna do the textures as well. So, go inside Blender. We're gonna delete the cube. Go to File, Import, and we're gonna import an OBJ. It is of course going to be the perfume bottle. Here we can see that it's made out of a cap. We have a side metal, I just didn't know how to name this. We have a glass, and inside we have some fluid. Because I want to keep the download file low, I did remove some of the modifiers. So here you can apply a subdivision modifier to each one of them. I like to do 3 in render and 2 in viewport. But what you also can do is just create a subdivision surface on one of them, then select all of the other parts, here, here, here. Select the one with the modifier as last, then click on Ctrl L, and then we're gonna make links to modifiers. So every one of them will now have this subdivision modifier. Let's go to the materials. Shading, and here we can choose our material, as you already know. And mine already has some materials, so I'm gonna delete them, of course, because we're gonna start all the way from the bottom. So this is going to be the cap. It's gonna be a metal or a silver, but I'm just gonna rename it to metal. And it's quite simple. Base color is already good. Metal is going to 1 and the roughness will be 0.1. The same material we need for this side metal part. You can just select that part, then click on here and select metal. Now they both have the same material. Let's go to the glass. So for this material here, I'm just gonna delete the principled shader and gonna add a glass BSDF. The BSDF just goes into the surface and now we have glass. It is a little bit hard to see because we are inside Eevee. Go to cycles and we can see through it. The lighting is not perfect, but we'll fix that later on. Now I'll go back here into our material preview and I want to look at the text that I want to put on top. The text is very optional. You can also put a different text, but if you want some liquid ass, you can add mine. Just add an image texture, open it, and open the texture provided. Now, I of course want a different material for the text and for the glass itself, so I'm gonna add a principled shader. I want the material to be black, so I want the text to be black, and then quite shiny, right? So 0.1. Now, I need a mix shader in between here, mix, and now put the principled shader into one of the shader, and the other glass into the other shader input from the mix shader. Now they get mixed. You have a percentage of the mix here. But we just want the text. And this is why this image texture comes in handy. Put the color into the FAC. And now we can see that we have a separation between these two materials. The problem is we need to flip them. But you can just flip these shaders. And it's as easy as that. Now the text is black. And it's essentially this principled node. And the other stuff is the glass node. Very, very cool. And as last, we of course have the liquid. The liquid inside is a very easy, simple texture. It's just gonna be another glass shader. So glass goes in here, and we're just gonna change the color. It is going to be this hex code. You don't have to copy it at all. You can just change your color or whatever, but this is the one that I chose. Then I'm gonna click on enter, and that's it. So these are the textures. And what I personally like to do, I like to create a empty here in the middle, scale it a bit up, then select each and every one of these models here, and as the last empty, then click on Ctrl P to parent them to the object. So now if I move my empty around, you can see that I move everything at the same time. It's just super handy, that's why. In the next part, we're actually gonna create a floor, a light behind it, and then we can start with the lighting after that. So I see you guys there. Welcome back. So this is part 2, and we're gonna create these wrinkles here that you can see, these waves. You can create it quite easily. The only thing that we need is a plane. I'm gonna scale this up, so scale maybe 10. It could be bigger, but that's okay. Now I'm gonna select it and click on Shift H, just to hide everything else off. As you can see here, this is going to be the area where we want our waves. If you look here, you can see that we have a physics properties. We want a dynamic paint. In the dynamic paint, you have two types. We have a canvas and a brush. This plane is going to be the canvas. Let's add a UV sphere, put it a little bit up, and this also will have a dynamic paint. This type though is going to be the brush. You can add brush, and I think we forgot to actually add the canvas on here. Make sure you do that. Now, what you can do, if you look at the canvas, you can see that we have a surface type. Right now it is paint, but we actually want waves. So, if we play our animation and move our sphere, we should be able to create some waves. This does not happen. Why? Our canvas does not actually have enough subdivisions. So click on W and then subdivide. subdivide, subdivide. Let's do it a few times. Now, when you play it and you move your sphere around, you can see that we create some of these amazing waves. Very, very cool. These waves are of course a little bit too big, and what I like to do, I like to make this a little bit smaller, just like a little droplet, and then put maybe 3 above each other. What I want to do is I want to make sure these fall and then they interact with the canvas. So if we also make each and every one of these a rigid body, it will actually go automatically. So now you'll see if I go play from frame 0 that they will start falling and they interact with the floor underneath. Very, very cool. The last thing that you want to do is you of course want to bake this. So let's first give this a shade smooth with W, shade smooth. Then I would like to maybe create some extra subdivisions. Be careful, the higher you put this, the longer it will take to actually bake, and it will actually also slow your computer a bit down. But once you're happy with this, what you want to do, go into your canvas, put the end at 100. I like to keep waves. Go lower, and here you have cache. If this is all grayed out, make sure you save your file and then you can bake it. Now, if I bake this, all of the simulations will be baked. So here we have our cool simulations. This is kind of how we create these waves. So let's check if they actually look good. What you want to do, you want to create another plane. We're gonna rotate this as well, 90 degrees. Scale it up and move it backwards. I'm gonna scale it up even bigger and I'm gonna keep it here. Now into shading, we just want to give this a new material, and the only thing I want here is an emission node. So emission into the surface. And now if you look from the front view, put a little bit up like this, go into viewport shading, you will see that it doesn't really look like water yet because this material has not been created. So click on the canvas that we just created, new, then we want to make the principal shader all the way black, bam, a little bit brighter, and put the roughness at 0. And here we can see some water. Very, very cool. So if you like what you're seeing, you can go on to the next part. If not, you might want to get some extra subdivisions here, or you can look at another frame in your timeline. Maybe the waves look better at that point. I'll see you guys in the next part where we're gonna create all the other lights. So let's first put our model in the right position, and also our camera of course. I'll actually start with my camera, I think. So here, and I think we just need to go here into view, lock camera to view, and I'll move it here. Now go to item, 0. The resolution I also want to change. So I'll go into output properties and then put this to 1080. And this y-axis is going to be 1350. This is kind of an Instagram measurement. You don't have to do this, but it worked in my case. For the object data properties of the camera, I actually put the focal length to 100. And now we can play a little bit around with the location. But to make sure that we're actually putting everything in the right spot, I like to select my empty and move the perfume bottle around. Something like this would work great. Now just match your camera up. And then I also like to look into here, Ctrl B, and then just focus only on this. I think I'll put the rotation a little bit down, maybe 84 or 83, and of course we need to go a little bit up. But they're not necessarily good or bad things here. Just play a little bit around with what you can see and if you like your scene. So let's say this is what I want. Now we can actually start playing with our lights because our camera is set in the right place and we have our model also in the right place. I like to go into shading, move this to the side, create this as a viewport, and here I will go into my camera view and then just focus on that point, and I can move my lights around in this view, as you guys already know. Make it a bit bigger, but doesn't matter that too much. I would like to delete the light that is already provided inside Blender, and this light actually looks very good, but I like to change a little bit. So you can see here we have only an emission node, and I would like to use some softboxes. So how are we going to create a softbox? Well, let's actually look at this part here. I also have a whole section about this in the beginning of the course, but if you don't want to go back, I can show you here as well. Gradient texture goes into the emission, and here we have a gradient. I actually want a spherical gradient. The problem is that the sphere is not really in the middle. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a mapping node and a texture coordinate node. Object goes into the vector, vector goes into the vector, and here it is nice in the middle. So to actually change the size and also the color of this outside a little bit, I like to create a color ramp and put it in between the gradient texture and the emission node. Now I like to put this to B-spline instead of linear, and then we can move all of this stuff around. So in this case I would like maybe this. Let's look what it looks like in a rendered view. Because I would love a little bit of a gradient in here. This looks very cool. I like this. So this is essentially the backlight, so we can rename it to backlight. But because this light adds so much to our scene and is probably the biggest light source, as we can see here, like all of this reflection is all from this light. This is probably our main light. And we want to check our exposure as well at this point. So let's go into our render properties, color management, and we can change from filmic to false color. So here we can see that we do see a gray line. It is a little bit on the lower end though, so we could maybe make this a little bit brighter. I think this is a bit too bright. 1.5 maybe? 1.5, between 1 and 1.5 seems to work well for my case. I like to keep it at the higher end of the gray line, but yes. Let's now add all the other lights. So this is the backlight. We're gonna add a light here. I like to make it a bit smaller. And what I would like to create with this light, as you can see here, I want to create a nice little gradient on top of this little cube here, the cap. So we talked about this kind of stuff before, and what we most of the time did with very glossy products, we created all of these sharper highlights, as we can see here. And as you can see, this creates a very nice highlights, which I always recommended. But I also want to show you that you don't always have to do it like this. So let's actually keep it at the more of a softer lighting here with a lot of fall off and gradient, and look how that looks. Because this will create a very nice gradient. The thing though is that the black parts here also get reflected on top of here. And that I don't really like. So what I would like to change, I'll just move this all the way to the left, and that already like solves the problem. What you can also do is you can keep it there, but create an extra color stop, move it in front, and just make it a little bit less bright. Just play around with these colors a little bit, and yeah, that should also do the job, as you can see. So we're happy with this. And we just want to move this into place, maybe make it even a bit smaller, and you can of course also rotate it, move it around. But the reason of this particular light is this nice gradient that we get in here. So we can put it brighter if we want this highlight to be a little bit more pronounced. And what I want to cover here is, I think I'll have a nice highlight down here, plus I have a very nice gradient up here. If we hide our backlight, we can actually see what is happening, and yeah, you can see that we have a very nice highlight here, even here a little bit, and this gradient here, which, yeah, that was where we were going for, right? So, it is nice lighting, and we can, let's just rename this as key light. We know it's not really, because the backlight is way more important. but in this way we know the difference between them. So what do we want to do? I think this is a bit too dark, so I would like to add a fill light. I'm gonna duplicate this. You should be very careful with just duplicating a model and then changing the material, because then all of them will change, as you can see. So what you should do is, if you duplicate a model, let's say this one is good, duplicate a model, then also duplicate the material, which is just clicking on the 3 here. It could be a 2, 3, doesn't matter, it's just duplication, okay? So keep that into mind. Now scale this up, way bigger, and we want a nice fill here. This fill is a bit, yeah, too much, so I'm gonna put the strength down to maybe 1. And this one I want a little bit higher again, because I moved it, of course. So around here it starts to look good. We can hide these two and see what's actually happening. And you can see that we get a nice highlight here, and this gradient is, the shadow got filled up. So it is doing its job. That is what we wanted. As last, I would light up this part here. It just looks a bit too dark in my opinion. So I'm just gonna duplicate this model. Remember, also duplicate the material. And now I want to just put it in place. Let's look where it looks good. I of course don't want to overdo it, so I'm just playing a little bit around with the scale, moving it around. And then the strength, of course, we can also change. So around here we get some lighting from that one. We can check it as well, so just hide all the other ones and we can see that we get some highlights. It's not really what I want. Maybe I should make it a bit smaller and then put it closer, but it is better than before anyways. So this is kind of the thought pattern what I did to create this kind of scene. I hope you guys like to see that we can also use different kind of lighting and you don't have to feel forced when it is, let's say, a very shiny object to also really have very pronounced highlights on it. It does not always have to be like that. You can also get a very nice gradient. The only problem is it is quite hard to see what kind of roughness this material has, but that is fine for right now, right? It looks cool. So last thing that I want to show you is Photoshop. So here we have this in Photoshop, and as you can see I did some stuff. So this is the result that I rendered with, and then this is the result that I ended up with, which has, yeah, it's quite a difference, right? So let me show you what I actually did here. The first thing is changing this color inside. You can see that we of course could look through here, which is normal, but I wanted the focus to be totally on this bottle, and this made it stand out even more. Then I created some extra darker parts to make it look more like a real fluid. And what I also did here is kind of cover this up, right? So I don't want this very sharp detail in here, though this water and then it goes to white or another color. I wanted it to be very blurry, so the focus is even more in here and it all makes a bit more sense together. Then I like to create a little bit more of a gradient, and then as last I pumped up some of the colors, and yeah, this just made it look a little bit more interesting to me. I hope you guys like this, and I hope you guys learned from it. If you have questions or want to show me your work, just comment down below or go onto Facebook. I'll see you guys in the next one.